Hello artists, today we are going to practice using watercolor techniques. We're going to section off the paper and put little labels, what we're going to use, and we're going to have some fun. To make sections though of the paper, we're going to use masking tape, and I would suggest that in order for it to not be too strong of a masking tape, put it on like your clothes first. I know it's weird, but it gets some fuzz on the back, and then it doesn't stick that much to the watercolor paper when we're trying to pull it off at the end. So I know that's kind of weird, but it works. And if you want to measure your paper ahead of time, that's okay. I just like to wing it, so it's okay. We're practicing how to use this watercolor paper and how we're going to use watercolor techniques. So I made 3 sticky tape rows on the middle, and I'm going to go across. And your paper tape, your masking tape might be a little bit thinner than the one I'm using. Okay, so we're going to first section off the page, and then I'm going to write what I'm going to do in each of these areas on the tape. I'm not going to do this on anything else. So on the tape, I'm going to write, this is going to be a crayon resist. That means we're going to put down some crayon lines, then we're going to put down paint, and the crayon should resist the paint. Same thing with oil pastels. We're going to write, you can write oil pastel or oil resist. I can write pastel. And remember, the tape's going to go away in the end, so it doesn't matter. If it's there now, that's okay. I like this one the most. We're going to mask off the area. Guess what? We're using masking tape, so that'll be nice. This is another funny one. Dab off. We're going to dab on the paper. That means taking a napkin and taking off some of the paint. We're going to do wet on wet. That means wet on wet. That will mean, oops, my dog's barking. That means you put down a layer of paint and then put down another layer of paint. And guess what? This one's kind of called wet on dry. So that's going to be definitely different. You're going to let it dry a little bit. I have splatter. Sorry about the dogs barking. And splatter paint, pretty much, it's awesome. We'll figure it out. Everybody knows how to splatter paint a little bit. And DIY, make up your own, like whatever you would like. Oh my gosh. So the first thing I'm going to do for these, I might come up with a theme that I want to use, or I can just come up with different cool lines and patterns into each of these squares. I might use the same pattern in each. I might use a different pattern in some of them. I like to use the lightest colors, and I press really hard. So I used white. You can't even see it yet, but I'm just kind of making some really cool things. And then in the center of each of these, I'm going to make the same thing. Ooh. I'm going to make a V for Vega. That's me. Okay, the next one for oil resist, I'm going to, again, we're experimenting, so I'm just trying to prepare the paper. A lot of what we do in watercolor is preparing the paper. And I'm going to use oil pastels that are absolutely brand new. So this is a problem while I'm on video. I can't open the new box. Okay, so for the oil pastel resist, you want to call it. Again, oil and water don't mix, so that I'm kind of saying to myself, I know something's going to happen. But I'm going to grab the first couple colors that come off of here. Oh, cool. And I'm going to write, you might not even see it right now. There is white oil pastel on this whole spot. And then masked. That one, again, I have to prepare. So I'm going to take the tape itself, again, kind of make it a less sticky. And I'm going to peel my tape and make something on the page. If you hear the lots of dogs running around, that's because 3 of them are running around. Sorry about that. And maybe I'll leave some cool little dots of the tape. And I'm just ripping it. You might use a scissor. You might use contact paper that you can cut and peel and stick. Stickers are a lot of fun. And then we'll peel them off later. So it's kind of a fancy thing. And then dab off. I'll wait and do that. Wet on wet. Wet on dry. These are all pretty much, we're going to splatter paint. And then the last one is like wild card. So I'm going to take my watercolor paints, and I have them all in color order of the rainbow or the color wheel. So I have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, brown, black. And they're in order of how the color wheel goes. So red and yellow make orange, yellow and blue make green, blue and red make purple. So I just want to kind of start with the beginning. And you might say, oh, I'm going to only use warm colors. I might use cool colors. I'm just going to put water on my paintbrush and put some paint on my paintbrush and color away into the areas here. And if you notice, there is a little bit of resist going on with the crayon. Not as much as you'll see maybe. If I use a little more water, you might see the crayon showing up. I kind of cheated. I used my sleeve. I forgot to bring a napkin over here. But I'm going to see. And so you might see if you press really hard with the crayon, it might show up better, but something is under there a little bit. And if it dries a little, it will show up a little bit more. Here's my napkin. I can also kind of blot it away a little. And we'll see. Maybe I'll add a darker color. Of course, it's not working for me. That's hilarious. Okay, come on, crayon resist. You're my first client. Didn't want to work perfect, but I'll just add a lot of color over it. So I guess I didn't press hard enough. You can kind of see that showing up. The next one, oil resist. Please don't make a fool of me, oil resist. Oh, look at that. You can see definitely oil pastel wins right now. And I'm using blue, and I'm looking on the colors. I can add maybe a color that's next to it on the color wheel, which is a neighbor color, analogous colors, or you can just say on the color palette. And I mixed a little bit of blue and green right onto the paper. Look at that. It totally resisted that and the paint, and it protected the paper. For masked, I'm going to go with a different color scheme. Maybe I'll start with warm colors. So with watercolors, you always start with a lighter color first. So I'm starting with yellow, and I'll mix my own orange. So red and yellow make orange. Look at that. If I put this down, I can see the red showing up. And on the other side, maybe I'll just go with orange. These are the warm colors. All right, these are cool colors minus the purple. And this one is my shame. My crayon resist shame square. It has to come back out. For dabbing off, it's different than the dance move dab. I'm going to show you, a lot of times watercolor artists, they will put down a color of blue, right? And they want clouds, and like if this was a sky or like waves. So they'll take a little napkin or a Q-tip and dab off some of the color back to the white of the paper. And this can work. I'm just wiggling it around. I could make clouds right here, right now, just by dabbing. And if I don't like those because they look like weird lobsters or something, I might go back, water it down again. That's what's really cool. The water, washes things away, and the paint is very forgiving. It comes back and forth whenever I want it to, but I can dab it off and make a really cool pattern on it. The next one, wet on wet. We kind of have been using wet on wet this whole time. So let's see, I'm gonna pick a light color again. If I wanted to start with like yellow, and I put down the yellow on the whole square. And then wet on wet means I'm going to see what happens when I put a different color on top of it. So I'm gonna go yellow is next to green. I'm gonna make stripes, but you see the stripes, they just kind of like bleed because it is wet on wet. It's sort of cool. Maybe I would do this on the other direction with blue, because yellow and blue make green itself. Look at that. I'm gonna go back this way. It's like a tie-dye picture. So different, and it keeps growing. It's morphing into something that's so cool. The next one, I'm gonna start with the yellow again. I wash my brush out every time, especially for yellow. If not, it will get this yellow paint palette all dirty. So I'm just gonna put down the little wet part on the wet on dry and go, or just kidding, I won't blow on it. I'll just let it dry for a few minutes. The next square is splatter paint. Now everyone wants to just whip their paintbrush down on a paper for splatter painting. guess what, guys? There's a better way to do that. You can take your finger, I know it sounds gross, but you can just kind of tap on the paintbrush and you get kind of a more controlled splatter. So I'm gonna go to the purples and just kind of tap it. You can even tap it on the edge of your finger a little bit. Or you might need a whole like splatter box to splatter painting. Now this kind of paint is watercolor paint. It wants to dry by like soaking into the paper. It doesn't just stay in like this big bubble. So it's kind of hard to splatter paint with watercolor paint, but you can make it very tiny and it will very much absorb into the paper and dry. So there's my tiny splatter painting. And DIY, I can do anything I want. And guess what? I felt like a failure at crayon resist, so I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna literally just color in a nice yellowish green circle. Maybe I would take another color of the crayon. I'm trying this again, guys. And maybe I'm going to then make it blue in the background. So I'm taking a really dark color. Again, what is going on? It doesn't want to listen to me. So maybe I would just take all of the things I learned. So I had wet, and then I added more blue for the wet on wet. Maybe I would dab some off. Look at that, I'm using dabbing off, crayon resist, oil resist. I haven't done yet, I don't think. And that's the thing, you can't just like go back in and add the oil pastel over wet paint because you'll rip the paper. Usually that's what happens. So I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna just take a little bit. I forgot the coolest one, salt. Oh my gosh, so for your DIY, if you take a little bit of salt, this is crazy, and you sprinkle it on your paper, it soaks up and makes these little dots. You don't want too much salt, but just enough to, you know, kind of sprinkle every like few inches. It will totally soak up it. I'm gonna zero in on this and then be like, do you see? It's like the ink goes right around the little dots of salt. So I think you kind of are gonna get onto what we're doing. The wet on dry. This should be really dry. I can see it's still a little wet in the middle, but if I wanted to make something like I had those green and blue lines that now just went totally morphed into themselves. If I waited till this totally dried, I can even try and dab it off a little just to cheat. Okay, I'm just pretend it's totally dry. And I wanted to make those lines again. I'm gonna make these lines. I was so patient. Look at that. The two green lines pretty much aren't bleeding all over the place like this one. So if you really, really wait, like you put down, let's say we were doing something like sky, and then the next day you come in and you add dry painted mountains. You paint the mountains on after it totally dries. It will be more of a controlled thing. So wet on wet kind of comes out totally like any polka dots, anything, it just kind of collapses and just blobs out. But if it's wet first, let it dry, and then, you know, that's the dry part, and then put more wet on top of it. I just like, it's late, just know, I mean what I'm saying. Let it dry after you put the first coat, then add the wet again. Then it's so cool. So once you're finished with all of this, remember how we can let it dry, but then we're gonna peel it. The trick to peeling it, after the other trick of rubbing it on your clothes to get the dust, is we're gonna peel this up, right? And I kind of hold it low to the paper, and you might wait till it's totally dry. If I hold it low to the paper and peel it, it should come off really nice. If it does start to rip, you have to be really patient with it. If it does start to rip, then you can kind of press your finger down and like pull and say like, not today, tape, and pull it a little bit gentler, and low to the page, like pulling it, kind of peeling it. But isn't this neat? This is the mask stuff too, just by watching it like that. So when we're done, we're gonna have this little like chart, a visual chart that's showing us exactly what happens when we are experimenting. It's like a science project, experimenting with watercolor paint. Now, watercolor paint is very translucent. It's like using little layers of colored glass. See, and I totally am peeling that, and I'm okay with it. It happens sometimes. If I really have a problem, you can get me, and I'll get like an X-Acto knife and peel it off, cut it, and then peel it a little bit more for you. But yes, so this is a fun kind of, I like watercolor paint because you have to, like, the challenge is white is like the color of the paper. There's no white paint. I mean, you can always add white paint from a tempera paint or acrylic paint later. You see I'm peeling off the masked area. How cool is that? But you're kind of, it's always like a strategy, like how can you do this and keep the paper clean underneath for the white parts, you know? And that's like the challenge. And it's like, it's on. We can totally figure out how to do that. And it does bleed a little on the wet dry, but it's sort of cool. You can even go back in and add marker to things. I still am like sad that the crayon wasn't working at its best, but look at that. I can wash it off a little bit. I can go back in later. All the little salt kind of fell off. Ooh, you can see it's like little textures in there. And if I made a mistake and it peeled off, I can go back with the colors I used and try to put them back. They're going to be a little bit darker this time because the paper underneath is raw paper without any like professional like artist watercolor paper coating. I made up all those words, but you know, like professional artist watercolor paper, I don't know. But yeah, it kind of, you can cheat a little bit and like, oh yeah, I never ripped the paper. Look at that. No one will ever know. Yes, I think it like kind of looks cool. We're catching on now. What watercolor is all about. It's such a fun adventure. So I hope that you have fun doing it. Don't be frustrated if it doesn't work. There's always the back. And if it really doesn't work, there's always more paper. Or acrylic paint or tempera paint might be your thing. But it's like, this is neat. It's kind of see-through, and you can see all the layers stack up. And when something dries, you can even go back in again. Like this one I really like. I'm just going to go back in and add like different polka dots. If it was this picture, which is the dabbing one, I can go back in and say like, oh, I'll put mountains and a road. Let's do it now. I'll just do it. But that's why we're learning how to do this. Like, we're making the background. These are all ways to either tape off an area. There's ways to mask off, like with oil pastel, draw it first. But I'm just trying to like get land now, let it dry a little more. Maybe go in with an even skinnier brush and add a road that's brown or black later. But right now, if you can see, I just took that dabbed sky and look at that. This beautiful little road in the middle of a mountainous area. So it would be neat to see what you guys are going to create next. I hope you have a great time and have fun exploring.